The committee is meeting to continue its study of the integration of the Canadian Coast Guard into the Department of National Defence. I would now like to welcome our witnesses from the Department of National Defence: Natasha Kim, Associate Deputy Minister; Mario Pelletier, Commissioner of the Canadian Coast Guard; and Katia Jolez, Director General, Change Management and Oversight of the Canadian Coast Guard. I will now like to invite Ms. Kim to make your opening remarks, and you have up to 5 minutes.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair, and good morning to committee members. Bon matin. I'm very pleased to be here to appear before you today with my colleagues from the Canadian Coast Guard as part of your study on the CCG's integration into defence. On behalf of the Deputy Minister Stephanie Beck and myself, I really do want to start by saying just how absolutely delighted we've been to welcome the Coast Guard to defence over the past months. On September 2nd, as you know, through an order in Council, approximately 6,700 personnel from the Coast Guard and about 450 employees from the Department of Fisheries and Oceans transferred to the Department of National Defence. Every day we're discovering how fortunate we are to have these highly skilled and dedicated individuals as part of our team. I'd like to begin by giving the committee an update on the status of the transition process, which has been progressing well. Cette transition repose sur une approche.
This transition is built on a focus on personnel, which includes clear communication and continuous engagement with staff with proactive measures to safeguard operational continuity. DND and DFO have developed a Memorandum of Understanding which sets out key principles, priorities, roles, and responsibilities to guide this transition, ensuring operations and programs continue to run smoothly, and the Coast Guard and DFO personnel are onboarded to DND in a coordinated process. Significant progress is being made and continues to ensure that DFO personnel are welcomed, well-equipped, and trained for their work in the Department of National Defence. For many employees, their day-to-day operations have changed very little. They often continue in the same work locations, and they are being onboarded with DND equipment and into DND systems in a phased manner to ensure minimal disruption. The departments are working together to assume custodianship of approximately 1,000 real property assets.
Has been DND's commitment to preserving the Coast Guard's unique identity and culture. This will be reflected in things such as their identification cards, honor systems, heraldry, and traditions. But preserving the Coast Guard's unique identity and distinct role is also important in discussions on its mandate as part of national defence. I'd like to underscore that the Canadian Coast Guard remains a civilian special operating agency. Importantly, the Coast Guard reports to the Deputy Minister and not to the Chief of Defence Staff. While the Coast Guard continues to work closely with members of the Canadian Armed Forces, it is outside of the military chain of command. There are also no plans to militarize the Coast Guard or assign it an enforcement role. It will continue to deliver its core services such as search and rescue, icebreaking, marine communications, and traffic services, while protecting Canada's marine environment and supporting other departments in their important roles, such as marine and ocean science. It continues to provide these services in accordance with the existing legislative frameworks, such as the Oceans Act, the Canada Shipping Act, and the Wrecked, Abandoned, and Hazardous Vessels Act. As the committee will be aware, Bill C-12 introduces an amendment to the Oceans Act to formalize the Canadian Coast Guard's mandate related to security, as well as to facilitate the authority to collect, analyze, and share information and intelligence for security purposes. This change supports and complements the move of the CCG to DND, but would be important in any event to facilitate operations that safeguard the safety and security of our waters and coastlines and our sovereignty in the Arctic. To be clear, the purpose of integrating the Canadian Coast Guard into defence is to enhance the safety and security of Canadians by extending our reach, improving coordination with security and intelligence partners, and increasing interoperability with the Canadian Armed Forces. Coast Guard and CAF personnel have long worked side by side, as we saw earlier this week with a dramatic rescue of a sailor on the West Coast. But importantly, this integration will also better enable strategic planning, resource sharing, procurement opportunities, and economies of scale for marine operations. The Coast Guard brings a significant fleet, deep expertise in Canadian waters, and a strong presence across all coasts, including the Great Lakes, the St. Lawrence Seaway, and Canada's Arctic, where it works closely with Indigenous peoples to leverage local knowledge. Ces capacités sensibiliseront le Canada aux menaces.
These capabilities will improve Canada's awareness of emerging threats, including in northern maritime approaches in the Arctic. Thank you to all committee members for this opportunity to discuss the Canadian Coast Guard in its transition. We'd be pleased to answer any questions you may have. Thank you.
Start our first round with Mr. Kibble. You have up to 6 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you, Commissioner Pelche, for returning with your team. And I appreciate you mentioned in the statement outside or core services, and I commend the Coast Guard for doing an excellent job. And I followed that story of the rescue, and the Coast Guard indeed continues to do excellent work for Canada on its core services. What I'd like to explore today is some of the new roles and taskings that are being added to your plate, and I would like to start by asking about, you mentioned for the Commissioner, it was mentioned new acquiring DND equipment. Could you be specific as to what equipment that is being acquired?
Absolutely. Well, specific, I think it'll be around sensors. There will be around being able to detect early on. It'll be around having access to more information, more data point, in order to have a better marine demand awareness
I appreciate
picture.
that. What specific equipment are you requiring? Air search radars, sonar, sonobuoys, equipment like that, comm intercept? These are types of military equipment that would support surveillance, which is the new mission. So what specific surveillance equipment that will give you capability?
I think at this point we're still assessing with our colleagues from the forces, so we haven't landed on a specific equipment. We do know that we're going to have a better secure communication system in order to exchange that information.
Thank you. So you're saying that you know that you need to have better secure communications equipment. We asked this before 2 or 3 months ago. It was the same question. We're now hearing acquiring D&D equipment, but we don't know what that equipment is. That causes me a bit of confusion. However, perhaps let's go to taskings. What specific taskings? And I know that it says surveillance and security. So what in that are you going to do with equipment that has yet to be decided to purchase?
I think we already have sensors on our ship as well too, and tasking, we've already been working side by side with our colleagues from the CAF, whether it's the Navy or the other services. So there's always already some data being captured that we are able to share from a safety perspective.
Beyond navigation radars and binoculars, I'm not seeing any equipment, military equipment that's going to add to the military mission outside of your roles. You previously testified that the presence of any sort of threat that the Coast Guard would be defended by the Navy or would leave the area. Yet these are the very threats that you would be conducting supposed surveillance and security operations. So how do you justify those two? You're searching for a threat in your role as surveillance and security. You have no capability to deal with it, and then you would just leave and hand that over to the Navy even if they're not there?
I think identifying the threat is the first step, and deciding, assessing the threat and deciding what to do with it is now become a broader dialogue. To your point about the sensors you don't see, there's a lot of sensors on Coast Guard ship that actually you don't see. The offshore oceanographic science vessel that we just took delivery from Vancouver is actually one of the science of the better equipped science vessels around the world.
Thank you, and I appreciate, and I've reviewed the equipment that vessel carries, but I'm talking specific for military operations, which is part of the new role of surveillance and security. Do you see your new mission for the Coast Guard as unarmed combatants, and is our Coast Guard personnel comfortable with that role?
Feedback I got from the personnel, they were very comfortable in where we were going, the evolution of our current culture, and it's not a military. We're never going to be military, so to say that we're moving towards a military, I can't remember the word.
So you're not going to be military. You're moving away from military. Your mission is to work under military, and to provide under D&D. I'm sorry, and to provide surveillance and security. And now you've stated that if there's a threat detected, which is your job, then you would leave.
I didn't say we would leave. It
Okay,
said,
you would stay when there's a threat, if there was a threat
well,
detected.
we need to assess the threat, right?
Okay.
And
So what happens if a threat is detected?
then
An armed threat is detected, what does the Coast Guard do in its mission?
we're not going to get an arm's length, and we do not today, and we will not in the future.
but would
This
you-
is not our role. Our ships are not
Weapon-
built nor equipped for that.
Threat weapon ranges are very similar to detection ranges, so you would be in range. What would the Coast Guard then leave, or would you you stay in the area?
Again, following the threat assessment, we would decide on the course of action, but we have very rigid.
So what would the course of action be if you're unable to defend yourself in any
Then
way,
we're
shape,
not going
or
to put our employees at arm's length of.
Okay, so just to clarify, you would leave then if you're not going to put yourself at risk. Your mission is to detect threats through surveillance and security and then leave. The two don't seem to go together, I guess. That's what I'm trying to do is establish, maybe you can answer, I'll just ask direct, what value added are you going to bring to military support, surveillance and security operations if you're going to be leaving at the sign of a threat?
Well, and it's not only ships, right? We have 126 ships, but we also have sensors installed on our fixed aids to navigation. We have radar sight. So there's a lot of equipment that we do operate that will help
Do
getting
sensors,
a broader picture of the marine
Do
domain
sensors
awareness.
on aids to navigation, are they able to detect threats, say submarines or military aircraft that might be coming into Canadian airspace? Is that, because we don't even know what equipment we're going to be having in terms of supporting this military mission, and we don't even identify what types of secure communications. I'm not seeing a lot of. I'm not feeling a lot of confidence in the capability to do surveillance and security, adding to the military role and supporting military operations. And I don't know. I guess I'm probably out of time, so I was going to form a question there.
You are, I know. Mr. Watchhorn, you have up to 6 minutes.
Merci, Monsieur le Président, puis merci d'être ici.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you for being here for the fifth time. Really much appreciated. I'd like to hear you perhaps speak a little longer to the strategic role of the Canadian Coast Guard in the Arctic. What are your observations to date? How will you ensure that you're able to collect the necessary intelligence in the Arctic? I'll start by saying that we already have a strong presence in the Arctic. Oftentimes, we are the only federal presence in some of these Arctic communities. We also have the capacity to see what's happening in terms of maritime traffic, but I'll focus on the future. With the purchase of the 2 polar icebreakers, we will have a greater capacity to be anywhere within the Canadian Arctic, 12 months of the year. Through the polar icebreakers, the polar helicopters that will be on the vessels, the drones, and the other equipment that we'll be able to have on board those vessels, it will contribute to the entire picture in the global maritime space. We were at the Halifax International Securities Forum. I was, and I met with Canadian companies that are building sensors and naval drones. Is this equipment that you are considering acquiring in the coming years to improve your capacity to collect information? Absolutely, it is on the list. I can't be specific as to the equipment itself, but we will certainly be benefiting from the expertise of our colleagues on the military side to know which equipment they already are using so that we're not reinventing the wheel or trying to figure out what they need. It's going to require some cooperation so that we can really focus on supply. One of your roles in the Arctic is to protect the environment, sovereignty, security, the environment. What is your capacity with respect to environmental protection in the Arctic and on the other 2 coasts? Excellent question, because when we decided when there were first talks about the transfer of the Coast Guard to DND and an additional mandate for the Coast Guard, we always remained clear that we have to maintain our current mandate, which includes protecting the environment. All vessels have anti-pollution instruments on board to protect against the pollution coming from our own vessels, but also coming from other vessels. We have about 40 caches in the northern communities, equipment that the community can access before we even get to the site. Any vessel in the Arctic has a responsibility to also counter pollution on board, anything that could happen by mistake. So we have a lot of equipment, and we also have caches in 3 spots in the Arctic where through aircraft we can deploy more equipment in the case of a major spill. The difference is with the coasts, on the east and west coasts and in the Great Lakes, companies have an obligation to enter into an agreement with environmental response organizations. In the Arctic, we don't have enough resources, so that ends up in our hands. So that's why we need to have caches here and there so that we can have access or give access to this equipment to these communities. Very well. In the Arctic, there's a lot of cooperation with the U.S. and Greenland. How do you coordinate the work that is being done with these 2 jurisdictions, with those 2 coast guards from those 2 countries? How does that work? It's a rather natural fit. Any Arctic operation requires good communication planning. The post-Arctic meeting is actually happening in Halifax, and there will be a pre-Arctic meeting in the month of May. We always invite our partners to this meeting so that they can table their needs and so that we can look at options for cooperation. The United States are involved, and with respect to Greenland, we support the American base that is in Greenland by escorting the ships that are going there for refueling. They use that place as a stop. Also, in Greenland, you have to remember there's search and rescue. We have common borders, so we often have to cooperate with both countries in those cases of search and rescue. And to prepare for that, we always plan exercises. Nanook is one of them. In this summer, we'll be doing a joint exercise with the U.S., which we do every year, more or less, and with Greenland also, what we call the Arctic Coast Guard Forum. This is where all these countries meet once a year, and we engage in regular exercises as well. Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Maxime Blanchet-Jonquet, you have up to 6 minutes, sir.
Merci, Monsieur le Président.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. First question for Madame Kim, Deputy Minister. To reassure employees and people in Quebec, can you table before the committee a detailed list of all changes that are provided in Quebec for this integration, the transfer, what is to come, transfers on scientific units, operational units, and specifically the people that I represent?
Merci pour la question.
Thank you for the question, Mr. Blanchet. It is possible to provide further detail as to the transfer, but just to be clear, DFO's operations stay with DFO. We've transferred some employees, 450, from Fisheries and Oceans for support operations. For instance, human resources, finance, legal counsel, as capital goods and other things. Nothing with respect to the mandate of Fisheries and Ocean, but specifically supporting the transfer to the Coast Guard. Question, can you guarantee that no position, no budget, no operational function will be transferred or centralized or reduced in the context of the transfer to DND? Excuse me, could you repeat? Transferring. So I'll repeat my question. Your indulgent, Mr. Chair. Can you guarantee that there is no position, no operational function, no budget that will be reduced in the context of this integration within the Department of National Defense? We have no intention of eliminating positions or positions that would be transferred to defense. I'm not sure if Mario or Ketia would have anything to add. Absolutely. At the Institut Maurice La Montagne specifically, we have a small team there that work on IT and are responsible for maintenance of small vessels. All of that equipment will continue to operate. if there is anything, we'll have more equipment to operate and maintain in the future. Mr. Pelletier, to keep going with you, l'Institut Maurice Lamontagne does an assessment for species at risk. I'm trying to understand, would you be able to maintain that same mandate? Yes, absolutely. In fact, that's part of the agreement we have with DFO. We have agreements with Environment Canada and others like the RCMP where we commit to giving some time to support those efforts. DFO will be determining certain things, but we will provide the platform so that we can meet their needs. Deputy Minister, can you guarantee that no civilian mission of the Coast Guard for the environment, icebreakers, etc., will not be trumped by military priorities? As I said, the Coast Guard is not a military. It's not on the military side. It is within national defense, and the mandate is defined in a legislative frameworks. So we have a change here to the Oceans Act that is before the House of Commons, but that is not a change in the role of the Coast Guard per se. In the case of a conflict between a military priority and an urgent civilian priority, like, for instance, a search and rescue or environmental issue, is who will have the final word, the chain of command or whom? Operational orders is under my authority. That's something that will remain. Saving a life will always take precedence. That was the case in the past, and it will continue to be the case in the future. We have priorities. We have levels of service that are published on our site that we adhere to, throughout all of COVID, everything that was sent our way, and we always maintain our level of service for those things. Does that not mean that you're in a conflict with the future authority? I don't see any conflict. The only thing that's been added to our mandate is a security mandate where we can share information or intelligence that we generate. In the past, we generated it solely for safety things, but not security issues. We'll be able to share this with our colleagues now. Madam Deputy Minister, why proceed to integrating now when no independent impact assessment was done to see that there would be an actual improvement in services to citizens? The idea of integrating Coast Guard within DND has been something that's been discussed now for years, perhaps decades even. There are synergies there that are really beneficial to have that integration with defense. It's also good for DFO. But you got to look at the pros and cons, really. Madam Deputy Minister, you authorize or supervise those things. Can you provide the analyses, the technical documents, the briefings that you provided to the document to approve this decision? It really is the machinery of government's job. It's part of the department role. It's a cabinet confidence issue. So confidence is transparency, Madam Deputy Minister. Do you agree? You authorize this or you supervise this transfer. Has there been analysis or has there been a command rendered or issued by the government? We're kind of used to that. Is it possible to share with the committee all the documents that led to this decision being made? This is an organizational, structural change that is major. I cannot commit to providing all of these documents, but we are so pleased to have the integration of Deputy Minister.
It's 6 minutes and 15 seconds now. Time is up. I apologize. Mr. Anderson, you have 6 minutes. 5 minutes, I'm sorry.
Thank you very much. So the Coast Guard is civilian, and it's staying civilian, but the equipment, including, I think you mentioned radar stations that are stationary on the coast as well. Is that correct?
Radar station?
Mr. Pelletier.
Radar what?
You mentioned that you had stationary radar as part of the Coast Guard. That's correct. So all of those are feeding information to the military. The Coast Guard's under DND budget. Coast Guard's doing DND work. The Coast Guard is cooperating with the Navy, and the Coast Guard is conducting exercises with the U.S. Coast Guard, which I understand is militarized. You're claiming that it's a civilian organization, though. it's also a legitimate military target, given the circumstances in which it's operating. And this has been, some of my colleagues have mentioned this before. There is a real logical break between trying to claim that you're civilian on one side and doing military work on the other, and also doing civilian work that has nothing to do with D&D. I'm wondering, could this not have all been changed and done? You said you're already cooperating with the Navy as it is. Could this not be simply changed outside the D&D system? In what way is moving it inside D&D budget improving the capability that couldn't be done without doing that?
Perhaps I can start, Mr. Chair, and the Commissioner can add if he wishes. Maybe just to start, like I said, the Coast Guard is a civilian, a special operating agency, and that's clear in the legislative framework. So to actually make it a militarized organization would require some kind of change there.
Exactly. So my question is, why are you bringing it under D&D budget? If it has nothing to do with that and it's structurally apart, why is it under D&D at all?
Like I said, it does offer synergies with defense, including...
Without being brought under, sorry for interrupting, but that could happen without being brought under the D&D budget, which seems completely superfluous. So I'm looking for a link between an improvement that bringing it under the D&D budget actually achieves.
One of our core defense objectives is to enhance and exercise our sovereignty around our territorial borders, and that includes our maritime boundaries. So, as I said, the extensive presence of the Coast Guard in the Arctic is a key benefit that we would see in terms of exercising our sovereignty in those waters and having that extended reach and awareness of what's going on in the maritime domain.
And I don't dispute that, but I'm wondering what bringing it under the D&D budget, how that improves its capabilities.
So we're hoping to find all sorts of benefits when it comes to procurement opportunities. So when we think about things like secure communications and being able to ensure interoperability amongst the fleets, both the Coast Guard fleet, perhaps the RCN fleet, our ability to have those communications in our broader network, that will enable certain synergies that we can see as beneficial. The infrastructure side of it is also important when we look at things like wharfages, warehousing, where we can find those kinds of benefits of being housed side by side. And that's one thing that we will also be exploring.
Okay, so as far as being a legitimate military target, I think my colleague mentioned we're the first unarmed combatant in theater. How are you going to, I mean, you can claim to be civilians until the other side starts firing because they're firing at a legitimate military target. In 1943, I think it was, the British put up radar stations all along the coast, and the Germans took great pleasure in bombing them because they were legitimate military targets. You are creating a situation in which the Coast Guard is a legitimate military target. And I go back to my colleague's question, what do you do? What are your rules of engagement when you're actually engaged? Do you just move away and somehow let the Navy take part, or how does that work?
So, Mr. Chair, I'll say certainly concerns around international law of armed conflict and international humanitarian law is a key part of how we look at concepts of operations. The Coast Guard is not a military target because it is unarmed.
I am sorry, but if you are operating with the military, feeding information to the military, the enemy is not going to nuance that. They are going to fire missiles at you. You know that. You know that. You all know that. So I'm wondering why you're putting the Coast Guard in danger. I don't see the benefit. The downside far outweighs the upside of this move. And if, maybe you can explain, maybe you can open my eyes. How is moving this under D&D budget somehow improving Canada's capability at national defense?
I think it's improving the ability to get a broader picture of what's happening outside in Canadian water.
I'll pass my time then.
Its time is over. I apologize. Ms. Lapointe, you now have 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'd like to hear the perspective of Ms. Kim and Monsieur Pelletier on how the new security information mandate for the Canadian Coast Guard, which was introduced earlier this fall, formalizes a security-related information role. From a departmental perspective, what governance structure ensures this new authority is clearly integrated alongside Defence's existing organizations? but while keeping the Coast Guard's civilian mandate distinct?
Do you want to start?
Yeah, sure. It's a line that we've added into the Ocean Act, but before I go, how does that benefit the department? I'll go interdepartmental. As you know, we've been a member of the Marine Security Operations Center since 2004. This is where we sit with our colleague from CBSA, from the RCMP, from DND, from Fisheries, and from Transport Canada. And we brought a lot of information to the table, but that information was not allowed to be used for security purposes, only for safety purposes. So now by having our security mandate, we will be having access to some of their information. They'll have access to some of our information, and Coast Guard will be able to build a much better picture of what's happening out on the water.
Ms. Kim?
I would certainly wholeheartedly agree with that. The security mandate is something that builds on what the Coast Guard is already doing. As the Commissioner mentioned already, they have a support role and support other departments in different facets of their mandate. And security is certainly something that's been part of that. The mechanisms to do that may change over time. So, for example, needing to have specific information sharing agreements to share certain types of information. I think what the proposed amendment clarifies is being able to collect and share for security purposes, which will facilitate that sharing of intelligence and help our ability to have maritime domain awareness.
Thank you. Madame Jolez, it's my understanding that you were responsible for change management and oversight with the Coast Guard. So as the Coast Guard assumes an expanded mandate, what is National Defence's role in ensuring consistent implementation across the regions and the fleet operations so that the security-related functions are integrated smoothly into the day-to-day work?
Thank you for the question, Mr. Chair. Our approach in change management is twofold. First, it's putting people first, making sure they understand what the transition means for them, what the expanded mandate means for them, making sure they have the tools and that they're empowered to make a contribution. Secondly, it's the continuity of service. As the Commissioner and the Associate have already referred to, as we take on this new role, how do we make sure that we're continuing to deliver the suite of domestic programming that we already offer? The Coast Guard is being onboarded in the Department of National Defense in many ways. We felt the warm welcome. There's training that's available to employees to understand how to operate within the new department, whether that's looking at the authorities that they're going to have, how they're going to staff their teams, the different tools that they're going to have. From a security perspective, the work is ongoing. The bill is still before Parliament, and so as we're looking at this bill passing, developing a maritime security program for the Coast Guard, we'll be working closely with colleagues in National Defense to define what that will mean for employees.
Thank you. Monsieur Pelletier, compte tenu de la présence importante de la carte.
Given the Coast Guard's presence in the Great Lakes and the St. Lawrence, how is it that your enhanced role will enhance participation with partners on these seaways and waterways for areas such as these cross-border matters and community security, community safety? The Great Lakes and the St. Lawrence Seaway is an area that we can really make a big difference in. We already have telecommunications and radar systems, but on the lakes, it's not as broadly connected. We cooperate with our colleagues from the U.S. and others. If we have multinational agreements as well, that mean that if there is a spill or a search and rescue operation, we're there to support each other. Our communities will be very active, but we will enhance our surveillance capacity along with our partners in Canada.
As the new role that we had that we're discussing here becomes part of the national defense and the security enterprise, how is national defense approaching the integration of these new capabilities into Canada's wider posture, including planning, coordination, and support of other departments?
That's an excellent question. I'll say there's three main lines of effort that we're pursuing. So first, as we've talked about a bit already, is the people, making sure that we're welcoming the personnel in a orderly and coordinated fashion as they come on board into D&D systems. So that will take some time, and we want to make sure that we're doing it the right way. Secondly, I'd say the planning side of it. So having that ability to strategically plan ahead in terms of whether it's procurement plans, whether it's project plans, infrastructure plans. From that side of the equation, there will be many synergies. We now are, I think, the bulk of the national shipbuilding strategy. So having those relationships with shipyards as well, I think, is something that we'll want to leverage. And then third, on the operational side, which we've talked about a lot today, I think there will be many opportunities to have that transition develop over time.
Thank you. Monsieur Blanchette, you have 2.5 minutes, but don't rush. The interpreters are asking us to play catch-up, so I'll give you an extra time.
Monsieur, merci, Monsieur le Président.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. Deputy Minister, you're refusing to hand over the committee the analysis and the documents that it would have justified the Coast Guard's integration in DND, but there hasn't been no independent impact assessment that was done to support such a profound change. How can the committee complete its oversight role if these kinds of decisions have not been done with any objective documentation Parliament can consult? Thank you for the question. We are actually here to answer all of your questions regarding what the advantages are, the benefits, or perhaps the challenges involved in the integration. So we are here for that purpose. Deputy Minister, with all due respect, can you transfer the documents to the committee? What justified this? Is there an independent analysis or not? Comment? Professors, academics who provided advice. We have internal advice. There's a lack of transparency here. People are observing this, and what it tells me is that it's an internal decision. It's a political order that you received, and there's no actual independent analysis that justified this major change. That's what I'm trying to determine. Is it a political order, or have there been rigorous analyses done to justify this? The beginning of that answer was inaudible to the interpreter. Can you transfer all of the documents, the rigorous analysis you're referring to the committee so that we can analyze it? Mr. Chair, as I said, some of these documents are machinery of government and cabinet confidences. Who can access these documents if you yourselves in the department will refuse to transfer these documents to the committee? I'm not sure exactly whom. But Deputy Minister, that's serious. You're telling me that parliamentarians who are supposed to look into these government decisions can't even have access to these documents. You understand the seriousness of your comments, your denial that you're refusing to transfer these documents to the committee. Mr. Chair, we can come back before the committee with a formal answer regarding a question. Can you transfer all documents, analyses that justify this decision? And, sir, we can provide analyses. Yes or no, Madam Deputy Minister? You have to show transparency here. Explain to us how you made this decision. That's all we're asking for. That's what the people need to know. We will provide the analyses. All of them, I don't know. Who may know? And, sir, we can investigate and get back to the committee with the answer.
Ms. Gallant, you have up to 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. It's for you. We've been told the national security is a whole of society effort, and that even ship's captains know whom to contact if they observe suspicious activity at sea in Canadian waters, and that some of those ships are even armed. If the only difference between the Coast Guard before it changed to Department of National Defense and the present is going from the fisheries column in the ledger to the defense column in the ledger, why aren't they including commercial ships and private yachts in the ledger's defense column as well, so they can bring us closer to the required NATO contribution?
I can start, Mr. Chair, and the Commissioner may wish to add. Maybe I'll just say that even when the Canadian Coast Guard was with the Department of Fisheries and Oceans, there was a significant portion, I think a majority of their budget that was included in the NATO definition. For example, icebreakers, and we see that portion of the budget actually increasing over time. So we would have seen an increasing proportion of the Coast Guard's budget included in any event. With the change, we are seeing now obviously 100%, but with the security mandate, we would have been close to that in any event. So the security mandate is not necessary to the transfer, but certainly would have been complementary to what we were trying to achieve.
So then the Canadian Coast Guard was doing nothing differently before the change of command from fisheries to defense. There's been no actual change in what you were doing previously. You were doing security work previously as well, correct?
The Coast Guard was. I'll say as well, as part of the 2% announcement that the Prime Minister made in June, there was also an investment into Coast Guard capabilities that would support its security function.
So the new capabilities, other than detection, and now, as Mr. Anderson said, make these ships a target by virtue of being part of the Coast Guard and under the national defense, they are seen as a target. Are there no future plans to add any protective equipment to these ships that our sailors are on?
So to be clear, there's no plans to arm the Coast Guard, which would be what would make it a target. And certainly we would be concerned if there was targeting within our domestic waters.
Yeah, there's no, I mean, as the threat evolves, then we'll reassess, but there's no plan to arm, and that's quite clear. If we need extra equipment, we will. Our ships are not warships. Our ships are not designed to go to war or sustain a combat. So that we're not talking only about people on board a ship. We're talking about the equipment as well too.
So the last time you were here, when I asked whether or not if a Coast Guard vessel was fired upon, what would the Coast Guard do? And we were told that the vessel would simply leave. What if they're in a situation where they can't leave and they're a target and they are being fired upon and they're not able to leave where they are? So how do they defend themselves?
Well, how did we defend ourselves in the past? I mean, we have standard operating procedure on board that aim to protect the safety of our people, and we'll put everything in place to do exactly that.
In the past, we didn't. The world was different. We didn't have the Chinese Communist government sending out their Coast Guard vessels, attacking other Coast Guard vessels. We didn't see the type of confrontations then that we're seeing now and are being brought to our shores.
I can tell you that we were in the North Pacific of Japan for the last 3 years doing illegal fisheries enforcement, and we're talking about ships that we don't know exactly what the threat is, but we've been doing this very, very successfully, and while protecting the safety of our people.
And did you have other forces aboard to do the actual interdiction with armed people?
We do that on the East Coast right now through the North Atlantic Fisheries patrols.
So if there's a danger, you bring aboard, or a potential for danger, you bring aboard armed forces.
We do that. We've been doing that for years, where we bring the organization that has the enforcement mandate in order to do the work.
Thank you, Mr. Lyons. Thank you, Mr. Mallet. It's up to you, and time is running out.
Thank you, Chair, and I will be sharing my time with my colleague, Ms. Romanato. Both for Ms. Kim and Commissioner Pelletier, thank you, by the way, for coming repeatedly. Apparently no one told you the coffee here is terrible, but you're always welcome at our table. There's been some suggestion here, and it keeps to be a repeating theme from our friends, that there's a suggestion that somehow in the case of a threat, we should somehow expect our Coast Guard personnel to stand and fight. Has that ever been in any of the discussions in this transition to bring the Canadian Coast Guard under the umbrella of the RCN? Or, sorry, the DND?
Mr. Chair, no, that has not been part of the purpose of the integration of the Canadian Coast Guard. As I mentioned, having the Coast Guard extends our reach, our eyes and ears across our waters, which is extremely beneficial. But it's not conflict. The purpose is not to engage in conflict. And maybe one of the other benefits I'd add is being part of defense enables better intelligence sharing, which can help take a threat-informed approach to the concept of operations.
Thank you, and I will turn my time over to Ms. Romanato to wrap up. I think we're getting close on time.
Thank you very much. And through you, Mr. Chair, I'd like to thank the witnesses for being here again today. So we've heard a little bit of some questions about like why the change, why is the Coast Guard being moved under national defense? Would you agree that in terms of Arctic security, that this change addresses new security challenges as Arctic waters are opening up? In terms of interoperability, strengthening cooperation with international partners like U.S. and NATO, and in terms of integrated defense, that it combines civilian maritime expertise with military defense capabilities for a more holistic approach to maritime security? Would you agree that that's an accurate assessment?
Yes. No, absolutely. That was part. This is all part of the discussion.
Now, in terms of, I think there seems to be some confusion with respect to a question of security versus a question of surveillance. So the security aspect versus that will allow now the information that is received by the Coast Guard to be shared with our Five Eyes partners. Is that correct? With this change, it'll allow the sharing of information and using secure communications to be able to transmit that information. Is that correct?
That's part of it, absolutely.
Okay. And in terms of how the integration is going, could you just give us a quick update on how the personnel are feeling about the integration with national defense? How are things going? I anticipate that we're actually going to be ramping up and looking for more people in terms of growing the Coast Guard. Could you just give us a quick update? Perhaps either Monsieur Pelletier or Madame Jolès.
The question. I think the integration is going quite well. We've been very committed to putting people first, to sharing information, to having information available to them, to making two-way communication possible as well, so they can ask their questions around what does this mean for me? What are the opportunities now that we're part of defense? We've talked a little bit about some of the synergies that this transition will bring. And so what we've heard from employees, they're excited to see how do we leverage procurement opportunities? How do we share infrastructure? How do we come together on recruitment and retention strategy? So very positive feedback.
Thank you. Thank you to the witnesses and for participating today. Time is running out, and I just wanted to bring to the awareness of individuals watching on TV and elsewhere to thank the staff and the team who have participated in making these things happen. I'll get to you in a moment, Mr. Maxime. I also want to thank our analysts for the great contributions they make, and to all of you and members of this committee who understand the preoccupation and the priority of us to protect our men and women in uniform, and those that are participating in the Coast Guard as well, who protect our sovereignty every day and enabling us to expand Canada's reach and protection and involvement in the work that we do worldwide. So I know we're coming upon the holidays, and some of our men and women are stationed abroad, and they too should be recognized and thanked for their contributions. And I know we have former members of the military who know that firsthand, so we thank them. And I'd also like to advise the committee that we are losing our clerk, Ariane, who is moving on to other services on behalf of government, will be served by a new clerk in the coming year. And I just like to, on behalf of all of us, thank her for tremendous contribution and her service to our committee as well. Thank you, Ariane. Before we adjourn, I think, Mr. Millett, you, Mr. Maxime, you have your hand up, but
Merci beaucoup,
running out of time.
Monsieur le...
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. Given the alarming, concerning comments made today, I'd like to table the following motion the interpreter does not have. The committee order DND and the Coast Guard to table in the 30 days all documents they will have served as a grounds for integrating the Coast Guard to DND, including any independent or external analysis, risk assessment, notes, that they be unredacted, and if there is any redaction, that includes some justification. I think transparency is critical, and for those people who contribute it through their taxes, I think people are entitled to the truth. That means access to documents, and parliamentarians can then do their work.
Motion's been tabled. Ladies and gentlemen, with your permission, meeting is adjourned.